Today we're talking about the variations, levels of editorial influence, perhaps one would use the word control, of the government as it relates to journalists. I'm going to speak specifically about my background in television news, but I'm sure that there are similarities in the other worlds, print, radio, for instance. Quick plug. This story idea was brought to you by a subscriber to my locals community, alisonmorrow.locals.com. The link is in the description of this video, along with links to my other platforms where I'm uploading some more exclusive content to those platforms outside of YouTube. Not everything's going up on YouTube anymore. Sometimes I'm chopping the end of interviews. Many of you who are following that know that this is an incentive to go to my other platforms, which are far less likely to boot me. So before we get started, don't forget that when you're done watching, go into the description. Head over to Locals, for instance, if you're interested in having more contact and conversation with a community besides the comment section on YouTube. Definitely a place where I'm more active and a place where you can not only participate with the community itself, but also I'm much more likely to see what you're talking about there. And this is an example of that because the story idea comes from one of my subscribers over there. So let's get to it. This comes from Politico's West Wing Playbook section. Reporters fume at White House quote approval rules, written by Alex Thompson and Theodoric Meyer, May 10th, 2021. Just to go to the authors real fast before we get into it. Alex Thompson is a White House correspondent and co-author of Transition Playbook, currently working on a book about the Biden administration and previously covered the 2020 election for Politico, as written for New York Times, Vice News, and Esquire. Theodoric Meyer covers lobbying for Politico and writes the Politico Influence newsletter. He previously covered the 2016 campaign for Politico and worked as a reporting fellow for ProPublica in New York. So let's start and read the first couple graphs here. If you've read a quote from an administration official in a newspaper or a wire story recently, there's a good chance that the White House communications team had an opportunity to edit it first. That's because the Biden White House frequently demands that interviews with administration officials be conducted on grounds known colloquially as background with quote approval, according to 5 reporters who cover the White House for outlets other than Politico. In practice, that means the information from an interview can be used in the story, but in order for the person's name to be attached to the quote, the reporter must transcribe the quotes they want and then send them to the communications team to approve, veto, or edit them. West Wing Playbook must make a confession here. We have participated in such arrangements too. The other week, the White House asked for background with quote approval for an interview with White House Communications Director Kate Bedingfield for a profile about speechwriter Vinay Reddy. Close to deadline, and with our editors giving us side-eye about filing late, we agreed. Now, I'm going to get into my commentary after we read through a little bit more of this, but I'll just stop here for a quick second and say many times on this channel I have talked about how time and the news cycle affect the decision making. And this is a great example of it because they literally right here, and maybe they're just trying to excuse their behavior, okay? So they're just like, hey, we had no choice, which we always have a choice. We always have a choice. But this is, I guess, their way of punting. I'm not quite sure, punting responsibility a little bit, but they're saying, close to deadline, and with our editors giving us side-eye about filing late, we agreed. So it's just like, I just want to get them off my back and just get this done. And you know what? Everybody else is doing it, so I'm just going to do it too. Granted, in my opinion, well, again, we're going to talk a little bit more about what I think about this. Not an excuse for a choice. We all make choices, and this is one that they made. It's not like they were completely forced, pushed, bullied into it, but these are influences that I try to help people understand go into what becomes the news, all right? And to discount the fact that reporters are like pressured by their bosses, have minimal time to get things done, pressured by the powers outside of the newsroom, all that stuff, and then just decide, you know what, it's not worth the battle. I'm just gonna do what everybody else does. Who cares? It's a great insight, I think, into how some of this stuff evolves, and important to understand a little bit of how reporters, I think, excuse in their own minds the choices that they make. Like they have no choice, where in reality it is a choice. And I've said before on the channel that I made those choices. Originally, I would complain, I don't have enough time. I understand the material. Oh, well, I'm just gonna do it. And eventually that led to the end of my career. I couldn't continue doing that. That's why eventually I decided to leave. Besides the fact that I wanted to live on 20 acres in the middle of nowhere, that helped the decision. But that was definitely a huge part of it, that I could no longer look at myself in the mirror and say that time resources was enough of an excuse to just be putting stuff out there that I really wasn't totally sure I understood. So let's read just a little bit more and then we'll get into some more commentary, okay? The practice allows the White House an extra measure of control as it tries to craft press coverage. At its best, quote approval allows sources to speak more candidly about their work. At its worst, it gives public officials a way to obfuscate or screen their admissions and words. The Biden White House isn't the first to employ the practice. Many reporters say it's reminiscent of the tightly controlled Obama White House. The Trump White House used it too. But reporters say Trump's team did so less frequently than Biden's team, which also used the tactic during the campaign. And a number of current White House reporters have become increasingly frustrated by what they see as its abuse. The rule treats them like coddled Capitol Hill pages, and that's not who they are or the protections they deserve. Every reporter I work with has encountered the same practice, said another. But, as is often the case with the unwieldy White House press corps, there is a collective action problem. Reporters are reluctant to say no to using background with quote approval because it could put them at a disadvantage with their competitors. Quote, the only way the press has the power to push back against this is if we all band together, said the first reporter. At least one White House reporting team has been talking internally about reaching out to other outlets to push the Biden team to stop the practice. Quote, have any reporters talked about mutinying? The second reporter asked. Quote, if you start fomenting an insurrection, keep me updated. They bring up this issue of competitive disadvantage, saying if we don't use this tactic of quote approval, then we're not going to be able to have the same kind of breadth of reporting as our competitor. So now we've seen two things actually that Noam Chomsky, for instance, discusses in Manufacturing Consent. The news cycle, the fast turns, and the pressure on the reporter to get things done quickly, and now also ratings, competitive disadvantage, right? They're all competing with each other, and their product is on the line if they do not submit to these tactics. I'll say that I'm not totally shocked. Actually, I'm not even not totally shocked. I'm not even surprised a little bit that the government wants control over the quotes that go in a print outlet or wherever else. This is what governments do. Governments have been doing this for a long time. I think what's curious to me is that this is now more so than just say like a plant from the government saying, hey, we have a tip for you. This is what's going on. And then the reporter is thinking that they're getting something that they're putting out there that's organic. This is something that's much more manicured, and reporters are allowing for it in a way that like they know it's a plant. Okay. So perhaps you were a reporter before where you're like, the government says that this is happening in blank country and we have to respond, or this is happening in our country, COVID, for instance, and we have to do this. And it's actually a purposeful piece of propaganda that the government is giving to you as a study or as a fact or as a talking point, like we found this out, you know, whatever federal organization, institution it is. This is like, you know, a level up, I think, of manicure in the sense that now the reporters know that it's a talking point. They know it's a plant and they're allowing for it, but putting it out there as if it's an organic quote. So it's like their level of consciousness of the plant is much higher. That surprises me. So again, not surprised that governments are trying to make sure that they look a certain way in the news. I'm surprised that reporters are allowing for this. Let's talk about, though, the levels of how this happens in daily reporting, which may not be at this level, but are variations of the same thing, okay? One reason why I wasn't really up in arms about Jim Acosta losing his White House press pass, you probably remember that situation with him and Trump, is that White House press conferences to me are theater because, frankly, all press conferences are theater. Press conferences are set up for the government or whoever else, a corporation, is holding the press conference to put their best foot forward and tell you what they want you to know. You can ask whatever question you want, fine, but they're always going to just give you whatever answer they want you to hear. If you really want to find out what's going on behind the scenes, you got to do things like file a FOIA, You have to find sources that are willing to discuss things with you that the government is not willing to tell you in a press conference. Press conferences to me are sort of, I don't know. They're like the part of your dinner that your mom makes you eat, I guess, but you don't really want to. And it's not really, I don't know, maybe that's not a good analogy because your mom hopefully is going to make you want to eat something nutritious. And press conferences, frankly, are not intellectually nutritious, in my opinion, simply because they are manicured theater in a lot of cases. Okay. But it's part of the job. It's part of a journalist's job. So I don't say it's not journalism. It's just not the highest purpose of a journalist. And it should be understood that if we're going to talk about the free press, the press conference is not the place where it's not the hill I'm going to die on. Okay. It's not the hill I'm going to die on, because losing a press pass and acting like that is the end of the freedom of the press, and that's the end of the free flow of information for people, or just this gross attack on it. I may say he shouldn't have lost his press pass and he should still have been able to go to the press conferences, but I'm also not going to freak out about that as some place where now all of a sudden we've lost all this really important material, because I've always seen it as theater. If you really want to know what's going on behind the scenes, the real journalism is happening outside the press conference. The press conference is just something you got to do. Okay. So the thing is, though, that's happening on a regular basis. And so press conferences are another version of what we're talking about today. They're still agreed upon terms, right? So this is happening at sort of a little bit of a lower level. What about a press release? Press releases come out all the time. And reporters, because they're hungry for material, again, another thing that Noam Chomsky actually talks about, it's this constant churning of the news cycle, and reporters needing material every day, news stations needing material every day, and the government agencies knowing that and have gazillions of dollars invested in public information officers in order to feed the news cycle. This happens all the time too. And reporters are often ripping quotes from press releases, and perhaps they're not telling you that. I would typically try to say, in a statement sent to us by blank, they say this. So you would know it was a statement sent to us. Or if it was a press release, in a press release dated today, the University of Tennessee, Seattle Police Department, whatever, says this. If you want to see the rest of the statement, go to our website, something like that. But there were days where I didn't have enough time to do, say, a phone interview or go to do an actual interview in person. And I would send whoever it was that I wanted a statement from, and I'd say, hey, can you respond to this? Can you respond to this? This is my question related to this. And whatever they sent me back, I would copy it and I would put it in the report, and I would say, blah, blah, blah tells us, whatever news organization I'm saying, this. All right. Is that of the same ilk? Yeah, I guess it probably is. I did just take it from them, right? I did just take it from them. So is that different? Not really. And I did it out of expediency, frankly, just like they were saying. And I wasn't thinking through the ramifications of allowing that kind of influence or control from whoever it was that I was asking for a statement. Could they have just said what they wanted on camera if I had gone to interview them in person? Yeah, but I would have been interviewing them for a longer period of time. They would have been more likely to slip up. It would have been less opportunistic for them to just say things that every little word was specifically manicured. But that's not to say they couldn't do that. Let me tell you a quick story. One time I worked on the biggest investigation of my career. It took an entire year to put one story on television. And I did a 2-hour interview with the government officials related to this particular program that I was interviewing. And I remember coming back to my station and talking to our investigative reporter who does this kind of stuff all the time and has done a remarkable job. She literally has saved people's lives. And she said, wow, you were gone for a long time. I mean, you have a lot of tape, a lot. Where was the press officer? Where was the public information officer? Why did they let you talk to these government officials for 2 hours? And I said, they weren't anywhere around. I just kept asking questions. And she's like, that's a huge mistake on the part of the person who's doing public relations for them, because the longer you talk to somebody, the more likely you're able to get organic material from them, which will then indict them in whatever it is that you're investigating. And so she was saying from the other standpoint, right, as an investigative journalist, of course she wants to have a 2-hour interview. But she's saying, if you're working from, say, the government side, you want the least amount of time. That's why they're always saying, okay, last question, get everybody out, 10 minutes. You get these quick responses, and they're trying to curate the amount of time you get with somebody, because the more time you ask questions, the more time the person is talking, the more likely they're going to slip up on their messaging. And I thought that was a really interesting lesson there. So it just goes to show that the idea of sending quotes in for approval, or even in my case, for instance, asking for a statement and just getting it and putting it out there. These are all ways that we journalists failed at our responsibility to really organically understand what is going on, especially, of course, in different cases. Like, say it's something that's not super controversial. I just want a statement from the local ice cream store about why they're closing down. Okay, maybe no one cares that they're sending me a statement about we're closing down because nobody likes ice cream anymore, or it's too cold in Seattle and people would rather drink coffee. Okay, that would be something I guess I would be like less concerned that I got a statement from. But say it's something that it's very controversial. It has to do with some kind of scandal within a particular corporation or government, and I'm just getting a statement from them, which did happen. I think that is a failure of journalism, because let's be honest, you're not getting the FaceTime with the officials that could lead you down a path where you're like, something doesn't add up here. And you put out what they're saying in a way that does not give them control of the messaging in the way that this does. So to sort of wrap this video, I am surprised at this is the quote, sending it back, and then them saying, yep, we've signed off on it. Because that really that's like they're the managing editors of the newsroom. The government is the managing editor. However, I think this is my point of the video. Though that is surprising to me, and I'm sure for a lot of people watching this, they're like, what? Be careful to think that this isn't happening on other levels all the time, and has been happening for a long time. It's been happening for a long time in many different ways. As I told you, the press conference, the press release, the reporter just getting a statement because they don't have enough time, and not doing an interview for every single thing that they put out there. If I were to fix this problem, of course, there are a variety of different options here. A, you have more time. B, you don't worry about losing your competitive streak, because you're going to just say, hey, we're not going to let you manicure the message. And if you refuse to put your name on it, if we put this quote in, then you know what, we're just not going to include it. Why they're telling us this, that's my final question. I'm always curious why this kind of insider knowledge is leaking out. Is it because they really are getting sick of it and they want the public to know, and so they're putting pressure on the White House to stop it by saying, hey, we're exposing this practice? They're not really saying they're going to stop it. They're also not saying that they're necessarily going to keep telling you in any way that this is happening. They're telling you in this particular article, but that's not like they're saying that the organizations are going to stop the practice or tell you that it's happening. They're just kind of saying it here. Now, they do say some news outlets have tried to fight back. They're saying here that the New York Times barred the practice in 2012 after one of its own reporters, Jeremy Peters, wrote a story about how quote approval had become standard practice for the Obama campaign, used by many top strategists and almost all mid-level aides in Chicago and at the White House. And that I guess the West Wing Playbook, the folks who wrote this for the West Wing Playbook for Politico, said the Times told them that the 2012 memo remains their policy, but declined to comment on how rigorously they enforce it, or if their reporters have always followed it when dealing with the Biden White House. They also go down to talk about the Associated Press. In 2012, the Associated Press also told Poynter the outlet didn't permit quote approval, and that the reporters don't allow sources to say, quote, I want those 3 sentences you want to use sent over to me to be put through my rinse cycle. So who's engaging in this? How often they're engaging in this? It appears there's variety from outlet to outlet. Again, this is not just something that happens with national news outlets and the White House. As I've told you, this is something that happens in different levels, in different ways, even at the local level with other government organizations or big corporations. I'm sure that, say, in the Seattle area, when it comes to Amazon or the Gates Foundation, this kind of thing, okay, these are big organizations with a lot of power in the local market. This kind of stuff is happening, where a statement comes out where you're just kind of copying and pasting and putting it in. Especially if you're a producer who's producing a show that you don't have enough time to do. This happens with the wires. This is how things get repeated from, 2 or 3 wire services all the way down to your local news market, copying and pasting. I think that's really my message here, is to just be aware that, like, again, this kind of stuff, the idea that because really bottom line, this is that the journalists are sort of allowing for, in one way or another, the messenger to curate the message. And this kind of thing is happening at different levels in different ways all the time. And that's the main point of the video, is to say, while this surprised me probably more so when I first read it, and then I started thinking about it, I'm like, but how different is it from all these other things that I described here today? It's more obvious and more blatant, but it's not totally different in kind, okay? It's just a little bit extra sugar added to that pie, if you know what I'm saying, okay? But it's still basically the same dessert. It's gonna rot your teeth, unless you're careful, okay? So that's the message. Just be a curious consumer of news, which I'm sure many of you are. If you're watching this channel, you're interested in this kind of stuff and this background information, and just be aware that these powers are constantly at work. Again, sure, you probably already know this. Not breaking news to a whole lot of people, but thought this was an interesting article. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Don't forget, links in the description for how you can support my work. Also, the links for the other platforms where I will probably survive much longer than I will survive on YouTube. And I will see you next time.